everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited to be here. I was so excited that I thought this was yesterday, and so I logged on and was waiting by myself, but I'm glad to see other people here today. I'm Carolyn Sattin-Bajaj. I am an associate professor in the Department of Education at UCSB, and where I mostly teach sort of in the traditional doctoral program, but I have the good fortune of getting to teach in the MED, a TEP class at UCSB. So this is sort of what I'm sharing is work in progress that sort of emerged from having the opportunity to work with teacher candidates, and it's kind of combining my own research area where I do work with immigrant families on questions of educational access and opportunity, usually traditionally having thought a lot about policy, but now getting to work with teacher candidates and thinking a lot about how we are working with and preparing teachers to teach the diversity of children and families that we're encountering. So I'm a little intimidated to be in a room full of much more experts on teacher education, and I hope this is sort of like a place to play and think and experiment with ideas. That's how I'm hoping it will feel for you. And I'm really sure I'm going to be learning more than you, but hopefully it's worthwhile and at least just a spark of some of the things I've been thinking about. I'll just say one more second about like where this fits into the work that I'm doing. So I am currently doing it started out as like this little this pilot studies of how teacher ed programs are thinking about preparing teachers for children of immigrant backgrounds. So it started with looking at the course syllabi at 3 teacher ed programs in California, and then looking to see what topics get covered that may relate to children and immigrant families. And then having the opportunity to do interviews with some instructors from those 3 programs about what they do and include, or if they don't, why not, or what the opportunities are. And now, as we speak, I'm collecting survey data from teacher candidates who had just completed the program about what they came in knowing and what they left knowing and what they feel they could benefit from knowing about children and immigrant backgrounds. And I'll show you some of the topics. And then I'm doing interviews with some of those. At the end of the survey, I ask if anyone's interested in potentially doing interviews. So I'm in the process of interviewing recently graduated this year as of June alum about their experiences. So this is all really fresh and new for me, and it just feels like the beginning of something pretty exciting. And yeah, this is some of the work. So I am going to start with my PowerPoint just to give a lay of the land of what I'm hoping to accomplish today. There is a lot of group work and a lot of hopefully interactive, not too much me chatting at you. And of course, like use the chat, and please feel free to chime in and let me know if I have a tendency to talk quickly and also have a frozen internet. So I hope neither of those things happens today. I haven't taught on Zoom in a while. What I'm hoping to do in our brief time together, I'm going to start with a quick reflection exercise for you to do individually, just to get you thinking about some of the things we're going to talk about today. Why is it's not now? My PowerPoint's not working. Okay, then we're going to quickly be in a small group to talk through some ideas. I'm going to give some basic stats on where we are as a nation in terms of our immigration patterns and trajectories. I'm going to do a quick overview of what the research tells us about immigrant origin students and families and some of the factors that influence them and their well-being and their experiences in and outside of schools. And then I'm going to return to our groups, or have everyone return to our groups and brainstorm, okay, some activities that you might be able to incorporate into your courses with teacher candidates, knowing some of what you hopefully will then know about what's meaningful and important in the lives of immigrant origin students. So a lot, but we're going to get it done with a smile, I hope. I like the cheerleading, keep it up. Okay, so just so that we're all on the same page, when I talk about immigrant origin student, what I'm referring to are a student with at least one foreign-born parent. So there, and when in the academic literature, and this is frustrating because in the sort of regular parlance, first generation, people usually mean the first generation born in the US. So my husband's parents are from India. He was born in Columbus, Ohio. He is considered second generation, but until he met me and I became an immigration researcher, he would refer to himself as first generation. But when I say first generation, I mean immigrant, born outside of the US. And in much of the research literature, that's what first generation means. 1.5 generation refers to a young person or someone who came to the US or wherever they immigrated to in their early teens. So they're sort of in this middle zone. And then second generation is if you're at least one of your parents is an immigrant, is a first generation immigrant. So that's when you hear me talk, that's what these are the definitions I am using. Okay, come on. All right, here we go. So for 2 or 3 minutes, 2 minutes, we'll see how long it takes. I just want you to take a little time to think about how migration or immigration policies affect you or have affected you as a student, a teacher, and or a teacher educator. I know that the topic of migration can be really personal and sensitive, and so I want to recognize that. Of course, I don't want anyone to feel like they have to go to a place that is not productive or comfortable, or this isn't the right space for that, and certainly not feel any pressure to share anything about your experience. So I just want to put that out there, that this hopefully will be a safe space for people to do some thinking, but certainly recognizing that this is a topic that is sensitive and personal. So thinking a little bit about how migration and immigration policies have affected you. And then also thinking about how immigration history, policies, or experiences were part of your learning as a student, or if and when you were a teacher candidate. For some, that might be more recently than others, but that's what I'm hoping to for a few minutes. So let's just pause on that for a minute and see what happens. I'm going to put us into small groups with some of that in mind, and have anyone have anything to share about how migration or immigration policies may have affected you?
I'll say something. First off, I liked when your slide actually wrote down the immigrant origin student, because I'm a second generation immigrant, but did not know that other term. My dad was born in India and emigrated to the United States, and like your husband. So, and then my mom was not. She was already here, but we grew up with the melting pot, not the salad bowl. So it was, we did, I got to visit India 5 times on vacations and would come back and maybe not even mention it, when I was back at school, just kind of living, completely assimilated. And I really appreciated when I became a teacher and I got a self-contained ESL class, where I got to celebrate cultures and bring that out of my students. And it was really a nice something that I didn't really get to experience. I got to then give to them. Thinking about how it's incorporating my learning, I'm actually taking a course right now through UCLA Extension with Dr. Tori Harvey, that I think is from your school. And my partner, she and I are doing our big final project on immigration. She actually teaches in the Netherlands. And so when I was going through the slides, I thought, normally as a supervisor, I'm saying you need to put more diversity in your slides. In ours, I was saying we need to add some Caucasian immigrants, and she happens to have immigrants from Ukraine where she is, so we put that in and made that kind of a centerpiece, and thought, so it's not them versus us, it's we're all part of this. So those are my 2 thoughts.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Anyone else? You'll have an opportunity to talk in a small group as well.
I'll mention something. I was thinking about how the landscape has changed from when I began teaching in 1976. even though I'm in the same area, I haven't moved, but the landscape has changed. But one of the things I felt early on, I'm not an immigrant. I'm native born, and also our family, my family and my husband's family has lived in the same area for several generations. But I felt that I had a foot in two different worlds as a teacher of many immigrant children, of mostly immigrant children. And I had a foot in these two worlds, but they didn't often mix or interact, and it was really, really evident to me. And it became kind of this, in your face thing when we had children and decided where our children were going to go to school and what kinds of what classrooms we were going to put them in, things like that. So I think the change over my teaching experience is what I'm thinking about, and about how now the teacher candidates with whom I work have a different experience.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that I don't have that much historical data in the slides I'll show you, but I think that that's a really important thing to think about, is how quickly and fundamentally the demographic composition of California, of the country, has shifted. And we're seeing how many people are not ready for it, but it's here, and the people in power shouldn't have a choice about what they're ready for and how they're responding to. Thank you so much. Anyone else before we go into groups?
Yes, Carolyn, as a school administrator, when the district I worked in started a Spanish immersion program, it was something new, something exciting, and a whole school was set aside for that program, where the teachers were bilingual, and children who came from Latino families or who wanted to learn Spanish then went to that school. So it was like almost like a charter school in a public school setting. And that was a K through 5 situation. I was at the middle school level, and I remember the superintendent of the district asked if there was any middle school that would be willing to start a Spanish immersion program. And I raised my hand and said I would welcome that, because I felt an affinity, being a person of color. I felt some obligation to do something for immigrant children, or children whose mother tongue was not English. So from that perspective, I was welcoming of that. But then having staffing with a teacher who understood and had the empathy and the skill set to be able to work with children who come from immigrant families was another challenge. Yeah, it's another challenge. Yeah, and the district or the teacher saw it as something extra they had to do. They didn't see them, assimilating and bringing everybody in. And I remember the district had a policy that everybody during this time had to get a B clad. Everybody had their clad, but they had to get a B clad. And the teachers were upset about that. Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to provide us with professional development? So that's another piece of it that I had to work with, and to make sure that I was doing the right thing for everybody. Because I was the principal of the whole school, not just a separate group.
Yeah. Thank you so much, because I think that's still happening. So the growth of dual immersion programs in California is one of the great comeback stories of the past few decades, and this pendulums, but there's a lot of implications. True. In fact, this year, one of the joys of teaching the DEP is that I had the first group of we call it the BAS program. And so they were all in dual language. They were being trained as dual language immersion teachers and doing their student teaching in those their field placements there. And it was thrilling. There was only a small number of them, but it's happening. But again, are we ready? Are schools ready? Are there cooperating teachers? I mean, even there's so much sort of culture clash, because the cooperating teachers who are trained in another time might not might believe in English time and Spanish time, right? That's a whole thing
True.
that people,
So true.
but that could be another day, because I'm not actually a language acquisition expert. And so this, how I try to situate my work is that I'm someone interested in, I'm not an expert on how students learn languages, but of course, language is intimately connected to migration experiences and identity and some of the other things. So let's go into our groups. In your groups, if I can, I already gave you a sneak preview. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time with my PowerPoint. Here we go. In your groups, and maybe you've already thought about this, in classrooms where you've worked, how present were topics related to immigration or migration? So when you were a leader or a teacher in a classroom or a student teacher or in any capacity, what topics did come up? How did you talk about migration or immigration? It could be your family story. It could be reading Esperanza Rising or any other number of books that might be assigned. It could be watching videos. And what kind of projects did you ask students or their families to do? It could be events you put on. And then also talk about how prepared you felt or you do feel to include topics related to migration or students' immigrant backgrounds in your courses now and then. So that's what I'd like to talk for about 5 minutes in your small groups. Hi, everyone. No, that was short, and I popped in on a few and heard some really nice conversations. So I hope it's giving people things to think about. I'm interested in if people found any commonalities or had very different experiences. Anything anyone wants to share from your group about what you discussed?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that I was trained in Minnesota, and then I have taught up in Humboldt County, as well as right now I'm in the East Bay. And there's a large number of immigrants here in the East Bay that are Asian immigrants. A lot of them pop in and out from India, China, Korea. And but I feel like my training was a little bit lacking, since the Minnesota farm community that I was in did not have an immigration population that I was aware of, at least when I was student teaching. And also, when I worked up in Humboldt County, I know there were some undocumented students who were dreamers, and I know counselors were working really hard to help them get their DACA paperwork, but I'm pretty sure that for some of them that didn't work out, and higher education has not, been attainable. And I just, it's frustrating, but, that's something that I've thought about.
That's really helpful too, just to remember how contextual, like within California, then the experiences, the needs, and the populations are so different. And then across the country, in Minnesota, I immediately thought of, there's a huge Somali refugee population in Minnesota. It's really well known for, and actually I wrote a brief once about supporting immigrant students, and Minnesota, St. Paul, Minneapolis public schools have some really great resources, but they're really tailored to that population or their population. So thinking about how contextual this is really important. Some things transfer, and part of sometimes when I talk about my interest in this work, I think about there are some commonalities across experiences of children of immigrants. If your parents are English speaking, again, I think my husband's my guinea pig. His parents are English speaking and well educated, but there are ways that having immigrant parents affected his educational experiences, just like someone whose parents might not have English and might be undocumented and might only have a second grade education. But there's a range of things that teachers might benefit from understanding about both the commonalities and the heterogeneity in experiences. Anyone else want to chime in? The time, I don't know where the time goes, maybe because it talks so much. Thank you, Isma.
Yeah, I wanted to share two things. One, in our group, Helen was talking about how, initially in 80s, it was really romanticized when, or prior to 80s, it was really romanticized when people came from other countries, European countries, how great it was. And then later talking about how, it became bad when people came from other countries, the immigrants all of a sudden became bad. So I wanted to share, because I'm an international student, when I first applied for the visa to come to US, and the term they used in the application was aliens, for people who are coming from, overseas, all of us students. And when I came here, I realized, how do you use alien? In what terms do you use that word, right? But coming from there, I didn't have that concept, I was just like, oh, okay, well, all right. But when you come here, you're like, wait a second, we're aliens. Okay. That's one thing. And second thing, when Sarah was talking about, Sarah, I'm also from Minnesota. I got my teacher training from there. And one thing I was very fortunate was I went to St. Cloud State, Minnesota, and we had a huge population of international students. So although they didn't do anything in the education itself, it almost became a part of it because there were so many of us. We started doing so many cultural things and all that. And that became a teaching in itself, a teaching tool of learning from each other. And as such, having the host culture also learn from us. So the university started doing a lot of great programs for international students. Thank you. I'm just gonna stop there for now.
No, I think I heard maybe Laurel was talking about her own teacher candidates and like thinking about how much richness. It's not always on the instructor to be the source, right? There's a lot that we might not have experience or know, that creating a space in your own classrooms where, especially on this topic of migration, and if you don't have personal experience, there's so much. This is like a way to open up for and then model exactly what they want to be or should be doing with their own classroom, of like how to create a space where we can draw from your own experiences or your insights and your questions about your immigration, your family's migration experiences, to then create something, build something together in community. Because I said I had some stuff I want to share, I'm going to cut it off for now, and hopefully we'll have time to return to this in a different way at the end. I'm going to move. Oh, here we go again. Oh my goodness. Here we go. And back to some of here's just some basic stats, so now we can understand, like, when we're talking about immigration in the US, what are we talking about here? The most recent data, about 45 million immigrants are in the United States, almost 14% of the population. As a share of population, that's not the highest. In the early 1900s, when there was a different wave because the population was so much smaller, there was a larger share, but this is the largest number of immigrants. And the top three sending countries or countries of origin, Mexico, China, and India. Interestingly, China and India are now the top two sending countries. So while a larger proportion of immigrants are from Mexico, China and India are sending at a much faster rate in recent years. And then about 11 million people in the US are undocumented, the majority of whom have lived here for more than a decade. This number has declined since the peak in 2007, but millions of people, larger than I lived in Australia on a sabbatical. There's 25 million people, and New Zealand has 5 million, larger than many countries. We have more people living in this sort of status, than many countries. And that's a huge part of the experiences of immigrants in this country, and it penetrates through schools and all forms of community. So a little bit more about the immigrants in our country. Spanish is the largest share. The linguistic diversity is so incredible, and I don't think we're doing enough to really value it, but I love this expansion of dual immersion. It's not just Spanish and English. There's so many ways that languages and heritage languages are being valued, and I hope it continues. So the diversity of language. And now let's think about the students. A quarter of students is immigrant origin, back to those definitions, has at least one foreign-born parent. So that's 20 million students in our schools. The large majority of them are second generation, so US born. So that's why this work is really about immigrant origin. Yes, there's a need for, and often it's tailored and specific knowledge about newcomer immigrants, the unaccompanied minors who are in their teens and coming along. That's a specific subpopulation. Much of this relates, but then there's also specific unique experiences that people might need to be experts in. But most of these young people who have immigrant parents are US born. About 7% of students have at least one undocumented parent. So that's 5 million children, and California has a large number of those. California, Texas, Arizona, New York, New Jersey, where I'm from. I'm really from Connecticut, but I feel like that's all the same. And then 675,000 young people are themselves undocumented. Talking about DACA, it's really complex now because there are folks who were just missed the cutoff. And so there could be people who have birthdays a month apart, one of whom qualified for DACA and the other didn't. DACA is a big opportunity, not enough, but an opportunity for many young people who were living in this fragile condition, but it doesn't cover everyone. And then I think Sarah just bringing up how important some knowledge about DACA, what it is and how to access it is so important for school personnel. And then using the census term Hispanic, like back to the stats, right? Over 50% students are Latinx. And first and second gen immigrant origin children are more likely to live in poverty than non-immigrant origin children. Because we're in California, I want to quickly turn to some of those statistics. I have to move your faces so I can see. 27%, so compared to the less than 14% of the US, in California, 27% of the state population are immigrants. Again, 10 million more than, larger than some countries. More than half of the immigrants or the foreign born population are Latinx, Hispanic. 20% of citizen children live with undocumented family members. So for teachers in California schools, the question of undocumented status, living in a mixed status family, is relevant to a fifth of the kids. And the research on undocumented status and migration shows that young people don't really necessarily know what that means and might equate anything about being an immigrant with undocumented status. I do some work on the impacts of immigration enforcement, and it's not just kids who have parents who are potentially at risk of being deported, because they don't always know. It's their friends, it's their neighbors, it's their communities are all negatively impacted by even the threat of ICE and anti-immigrant sentiment and xenophobia and the kinds of policies that have continued to exist. And back to some of the conversation about language and dual language, and 40% of students in California public schools speak a language other than English at home. 80% of those students speak Spanish. So turning to some of the research, what we know about how, starting kind of negative, I want to acknowledge that this shouldn't be taken as a deficit view of immigrant origin children. I have a deficit view of anti-immigrant policies and xenophobia and immigration enforcement. And I think it's important to understand the consequences of those, but this is not to frame these young people and their families in a deficit way. It's to understand some of the implications of what they're living through, and then thinking about, and I'm in my interviews with some of my students, the teacher candidates, they talk about one professor who really highlights the joy of being an immigrant and the joy associated with immigration experiences. And I want to foreground that and acknowledge that while I'm starting with consequences, it's not to be taken as a deficit frame. So the mental health and physical and mental health consequences, well documented, associated with having a parent who has been deported, having an undocumented family member, living in a state or in a context, even a county where they adopt agreements with ICE and the local police department. And California is a sanctuary state, so they're not allowed to do that. But we all know that doesn't mean that there aren't some things happening that violate that. In terms of academic consequences of anti-immigrant policies, harsh immigration enforcement, and here I don't have time, I can send you some references if you want to know more about how under Obama's second term, it became a little bit more humane with prosecutorial discretion, which then under the Trump administration, it was sort of a free-for-all. Anyone could be detained at any time. But for children of undocumented immigrants, for example, have slower cognitive and language development because families are less likely to engage with services that they might be eligible because there's a fear of any sort of public engagement with public entities. Parents of unlikely undocumented immigrants, it's often really hard to measure because you're not going to ask people, and people are often not going to tell you their immigration status, but a higher probability of repeating a grade and dropping out if your parent is a likely undocumented. Higher rates of changing schools if you're in a place where they do have local cooperation with ICE, and then test score implications, negative implications for test scores when there is higher frequency of ICE activity nearby. also evidence of higher absenteeism, usually immediately after an immigration raid or an event, and then it comes back, but there are still implications. And then one paper I recently did with a co-author using the California core data. There's 8 largest districts in California, and we looked at students' self-reported sense of safety and the school climate in places where there were more ICE activity, and it declines for all students regardless of the racial ethnic background or linguistic background. And then we have data talking about the DACA eligibility. Sarah, thanks for bringing that up, that students who are not DACA eligible have much lower aspirations and fewer educational opportunities, and that has long-term repercussions individually at the family level and at the societal level. And then other things to know or think about that research has shown that, again, teachers can't know it all. I'm just trying to flag some of the topics that can and could come up as relevant. The ways that growing up in an immigrant family might affect the family dynamics. So in some families, there might have been long-term separations if a parent left and immigrated early, or both parents, and a child was left with a grandparent and another relative in the country of origin, and then 10 years later, they're reunited with a parent they didn't know. Language brokering refers to when young people are asked to serve as interpreters for their family members, and what that does to the dynamic, to the parent. They talk about parent-child role reversal. There's some really beautiful podcasts talking about when a kid is not fully translating because they don't want the parent to know that they were not doing well on their test. Like, what does that mean? So teachers being aware that some of this might be going on when they're asking, when the district doesn't have translation or interpretation, what are the implications for that family dynamic when a child has to interpret? Oh, I have family separations twice. Excuse me. Yeah, it's really important, family separations. And then thinking about a mixed status family, it's not only that maybe a parent is undocumented living with a citizen child, but there might be siblings who have different status. If one child was born in the US and the other child was not, that there are all of these implications for a family. The importance of recognizing the trauma that might accompany migration, so the journey itself and those relationships and family members left behind, and even what the life left behind could be, leaving trauma. And for teachers to have some sense of the ways that growing up as an immigrant or an immigrant origin child, where multiple languages and multiple countries are represented, has influences a person's sense of belonging and identity. For immigrants, scholars talk about having a dual frame of reference when you do have, like, in both ways that could be beneficial and also ways that can be challenging to have a foot in multiple countries, but you do have an alternative to ground yourself. And there's a lot of evidence that second generation US born or native born children might feel like they don't belong anywhere, especially in a society that might reject their language, their culture, their skin color, their practices, their food. So thinking a lot about those questions. Oh, I see chats. I'm going to look in the chats after. This is when I was teaching online. I couldn't handle it all. So this is from the work that I'm currently doing. Some of the, and these are actually some of the items that were in my survey. This is what I was looking to see if the courses, the syllabi that I reviewed, did any of these topics come up? And then I asked in the survey for the teacher candidates, did this come up in any of your courses? So anything about policies themselves and how they've changed over time. I think Sophia, is that your name? Like Mattingly, I remember your last name. Yes, Sophia was talking about how the different types of immigrants were framed differently at different times under different policies. So there's been a many different, even in the past few years, like we had the Muslim ban, we have so many changes to policies. Refugees policies have changed dramatically. What is the history? Are teacher candidates learning anything about the history of immigration in the US? Do they understand immigration enforcement? Do people know about Plyler versus Doe, the Supreme Court ruling that says that regardless of citizenship status. All young people have a legal right to be educated and free public education through 12th grade. What do people know about DACA and the DREAM Act? Again, I'm referring to some of the research I showed earlier about have topics related to parent-child dynamics been discussed? Do people understand, or do you talk about or read about or watch videos and documentaries about separations? What about trauma? I mean, there's much more discussion about trauma-informed teaching and teaching practices. Does the trauma related to migration experiences get incorporated? And then some other topics that are not exclusive only to immigrant origin students, but the racialized experiences of BIPOC students. Thinking to Sarah's comment about how different locations have really different experiences. I'm doing a project in North Santa Barbara County where there's a large Mixteco indigenous population. And so that's really different than the Mexican immigrant that might have immigrants who are not indigenous, for example. So really knowing your local context. We talked a little bit about newcomer immigrant students who might have different needs. And then something that has come up, and that comes up frequently, both from the survey results showing that many of the teacher candidates didn't feel adequately prepared to engage with families, often when language is a challenge, but it's beyond language, right? When they might not speak the same language as parents, but how are teacher candidates or in their courses and outside of their courses being supported in learning how to effectively build relationships with immigrant families. So some of this also came from analyzing some of the syllabi. What do people do? What are they doing? So there's assigned readings. I teach to my doctoral and master's students, I teach an immigration and education class, and I totally redid the syllabus last fall, and I interspersed memoirs with some of the more traditional academic readings, and it was amazing. And I will gladly share that syllabus just because there's so many good memoirs out there, and it was so rich in our discussions. So, and I know that teacher candidates have so much going on and you have to cram so much stuff into your courses, but even just a few short readings. Autobiographies and journaling. I asked my students, again, they were PhD students, some of whom had been teachers, to write their own migration story, or like their own sort of autobiography in their relationship to migration. There's so many documentaries, and I know there was a request for podcasts, so I will look and see what I have and what else I can recommend. Guest speakers from the community, from diverse migration experiences. I know COVID has made it much more complicated to do community walks and observations. In my interviews with some of the course instructors, they talked about how important it was for their teacher candidates to really understand the communities and neighborhoods where the students came from, actually seeing it and being there and walking around. And then home visits as a really powerful way to really know something more about students, regardless of if it's migration or not. So that was a lot of talking. Before I go on to this last activity, does anyone have any questions or comments? I certainly can share this whole PowerPoint after. I like to put it up before because I want everyone to be excited for the first time they get to see the material. But any questions, comments so far? We're done at 12:10, right? Okay, good. All right, well then let me go back, and this is what I'd like you to work on in your small groups again. I'll put, or Sarah, Andrea's gonna link to the Google folder where I have the slide with some of the topics, just to spark your mind, your conversation. And I'd just like you to work in groups to talk about how you might incorporate or brainstorm some ideas, how you might be able to incorporate some of those topics into courses you teach. What would the topics be? How might you do it? And like, what would cause it? It's because you think they all should know, or because you're, going back to Laurel's comment that you have immigrant origin students who are your teacher candidates. Just giving you a chance to start early. I know I threw a lot at you, but just to start brainstorming how this might actually be incorporated in what you're doing. Conversations. If you don't have any baked idea, anyone want to share what you talked about?
Go ahead, Margaret.
One of the things that I shared was that with my most recent group of teacher candidates, I felt very comfortable asking them questions about what their education was like at the grade level where they were teaching. Like, tell me what your kindergarten was like, or tell me what your third grade experience was like, knowing that they had gone to school here in the same district where they are doing their clinical practice. However, I did not hear about their immigration experiences, but I also didn't ask. I felt a little timid.
I think that's so reasonable, and thank you for sharing that. But like I tried to say at the beginning, this is something really personal, and I think one of multiple reasons why topics about migration and immigration might not come up is because instructors don't know how to broach it. And if we aren't comfortable, then how are they going to be able to? So like being really thoughtful about, in one of my interviews, one of the teacher candidates who herself is undocumented said she was a senior in high school, I think, when Trump had just gotten elected, and then the social studies teacher had them debate his immigration policies, and she was like, oh, like not the right way. Right? She was sitting there and this is her life and they were debating. So there's a lot of pitfalls and I think being afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing is a really reasonable fear. And so reading more, not diving right in, establishing a foundation where there is some sense of trust and vulnerability, I think is, and I imagine many or you all do that anyway. And then,
I was going to quickly
ahead,
say that if you can gain a student's consent, tell your candidates to, try to sidebar a student if you want them to, present something related to their culture. If you can get their consent versus just saying, hey, now you're from there, tell us, that would be a recommendation.
Thank you.
And I am going to be respectful of our time, but I'm going to ask if Carolyn will stay on if folks want to ask questions. But I am going to leave the meeting. But before we do, thank you very much, Carolyn, for your time and expertise and sharing your knowledge and these resources. Can't wait to see what you come from that. So can you guys join me in just any sense of gratitude or thank you, clapping hands or whatever it is that you would like to share. And thank you. I am going to jump off, but the room will stay open, Carolyn, for as long as you'd like.
I do not want to stand between people and their lunch.
Yes, that also, right? All right, sounds good. Thank you, everyone. See you in the next session, I hope.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Carolyn. I have a question.
Hi.
One person, well, I'm just personally interested in cultural forms of humor. And I'm wondering if you've done any research or have some resources, because depending on the ages, I want to start with a project with my student teachers for their kids on differences in humor. Partly that was stimulated by one person in our group saying, well, how can a class do a project on writing immigrant stories if there are white students in the room? And I think that we all need to address this as, and problematize that and look at maybe for me, I start with deconstructing terms like immigrant, refugee, alien, foreign, newcomer, colonized, minoritized versus minorities. But yeah, if anyone has any references on cultural humor, I'm collecting them.
Yes, I don't, but I love that idea of like what an interesting way to like an entry point into culture and both commonalities and differences. I think that's really cool. I should put this on the resources list, but Reimagining Migration, have you heard of that organization? Because they are my former doctoral advisor, but he and his wife, so it's Marcelo and Carola Suarez Orozco, and they, with someone who worked at Facing History and Ourselves, it's basically an organization that helps with materials to teach about migration in schools and libraries and educational institutions. So they have an amazing website with a ton of resources, and their whole thing is that immigration affects all of us. It's not just teaching about the immigrant kids in the classroom. It's teaching about migration as part of our shared story and history for everyone. And so I think that they might have they've thought a lot about how to incorporate non-immigrant origin white kids into the conversations about migration in a meaningful way. So that might be a starting point. But I don't have any references for culture or humor, and I think that's great. Margaret, and then Usma, I saw that you had your hands raised.
Yes, I wanted to ask you if you are going to put your research with Indigenous population in North Santa Barbara County in the folder, or where can I?
It just started. I have nothing to say other than I have a district that has asked me to do some interviews and focus groups to understand why the Mixteco immigrant community is not utilizing the resources they have available. But Adria told me that there's a doctoral student at Santa Cruz who's doing her research on teachers in Watsonville and Santa Barbara County who have large Indigenous Mexican families and populations. So she might have more resources. Circle back in a year and a half, maybe I will, but I don't know much yet.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Osma, did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to say, so I also have Montessori teaching background. One of the things I would highly recommend is your parents in your classroom are your biggest resource. And you can create a class list in the beginning of the school year and just giving them options if they want to be more involved and coming in for presentations or helping, or it's sometimes even cooking different things in your classroom. Creating cultural art projects. So I used to incorporate a lot of that, and it builds a community in your classroom then, so that you're not looking at each other as if you're, I don't know, like almost opponents, the way the world makes you feel, but more like you're a team, So I just wanted to throw that out there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like having people, because there's often sort of a whether or not the teacher wants it, there's a sense of a hierarchy and a power dynamic often when parents might not speak the dominant language or feel like they have a different lower education levels, or in some countries where the teachers are the experts, the academic experts, and I'm going to defer to them. But when a parent has a chance to be an expert in their language or food or culture, then that shifts the dynamic, and you can be partners and you can be the student. And I think that's great. Yeah.
And I've also seen in some instances where parents, like you're saying, could not speak English as well. And then their child almost becomes a mini teacher with them and tries to do it with them. And it becomes a really very beautiful experience for the two of them, because all of a sudden they are becoming this interpreter for their parent and also sharing their culture at the same time. So yeah, definitely there's a lot of power struggle in it as well. Yeah.
Linda, did you want to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to thank you for your presentation, Carolyn, because it's such a sensitive, it can be such a sensitive topic. And I think it's so important, the work that you're doing and the research that you're doing to help support teacher educators in really getting to know their students and their communities.
Thank you so much. No, I was so, they're pleasantly welcomed by the teacher ed programs. And so that shows me that, people care and are interested in this and are willing to be vulnerable and open up their syllabi. And and knowing that I'm new to teacher ed, I was so intimidated by the teacher ed space, and folks have been really open and welcoming, and knowing that I come with some expertise, but a lot of lack of knowledge, and maybe together we can build something that really fits within what teacher education is already doing and how to enhance it. So I appreciate you saying that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Good luck. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.